All right, super. So so I'm Ruth Stryker, part of MarkLogic University. Some of you have taken the Self-Paced Fundamentals course and perhaps heard my voice, or maybe you will in the future, and I'll get to see you. I originally joined MarkLogic. I first got into the technology in 2009, and actually live over here in England, although you can tell from my accent I'm American. And let's just jump right in. So we all know that MarkLogic is an enterprise NoSQL database, that it can be used for storing and searching data in a wide variety of structures and types, that it can be used for all sorts of applications, including for integrating data from silos. What we're going to do in this session is we're gonna kind of start small. We're gonna create a nice little search application, hands-on together. We're gonna go through creating this in this session. And as we go through these steps, we'll end up standing up an application. So you'll get to see creating the database, loading the data, all the basics. So first we'll talk about a project. So thinking about a project, thinking about your application code, where you're going to store that, we'll talk about that, how to create a database, how to bring your data in, how you can query your data, and then finally, standing up a little news application that we're going to create. All right, so there's some examples of applications. So whether your application is Yell.com, which is a site for searching for small businesses in your area. I like this example because you can see that you would have the businesses as documents in your database, in your MarkLogic database, but that you can also integrate with geospatial technologies as well. So it's a nice example. Or maybe you're Aetna and you've got 140 data feeds that need to go into your HR data hub. Or perhaps you are MarkLogic University and you've set up your training registration system in MarkLogic, as we have done. Or perhaps you're OECD, right, which is an organization some of you may be familiar with. They have huge amounts of data, all sorts of research data you want to be able to access and query and use and make available to people. Or, so in any of these cases, you want to have a vision for your project. Ideal would be to spec it out, preferably in writing. And if you're doing something really big, maybe start small. Start with one part of that project so you can get comfortable with MarkLogic and then expand from there. So our project in this session we're going to build is this little news application. The articles came from the BBC. And we're going to, create a database. We're going to load articles. We're going to then stand up the search application so that if we were to enter a search term in, then we'd see the results coming back. So we've got a project in mind. So now we need to think about our application code. So there's a couple ways you can approach this. So either way, you're going to have your data in your MarkLogic database. And then for your application code, you can either have MarkLogic host it. So MarkLogic can not only be your database, but if you'd like it to, it can also be your application server and web server. And if you go that route, then you're going to be writing your application code either in Xquery, which is our longtime native programming language, or what we now also equally support is JavaScript as a programming language. So I would say about 50% of our customers do this. And I would say the other 50% of our customers have their application code outside of MarkLogic, and then they talk to their MarkLogic database through any of these APIs here. So if you happen to be a Java developer, we have a dedicated Java API. If you're a JavaScript developer, we have a Node API. If you're developing in any other programming language, C#, Python, PHP, Ruby, whatever your favorite is, you'll talk to your MarkLogic database through the REST API. And as you can imagine, that's quite common and popular because people are using all sorts of different programming languages out there.
Is there a performance penalty there?
I would say they're all performant. They're all equally performant.
So using R on the MarkLogic database, there's no performance penalty.
Sorry?
If you use R, for example, through REST API.
I haven't done anything with R.
Oh, you should.
Oh, it's good, huh? Okay, I'll have to check that out. I know it's quite popular. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. So I would imagine R if you do that through the REST API. Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So in our case, for our little application, we're going to have it in xQuery. So we're going to have MarkLogic host our application code, so you can see an example of that. All right. So next thing is creating a database. So what we need to do in order to create a database is we need to install MarkLogic. I've already done that on my machine just to save time, and start it running. And then we can go ahead, and it's actually quite easy to define a database. So just to talk for a moment about installing MarkLogic, where you would download it from would be developer.marklogic.com/products. And on this page, you can see the installers for MarkLogic for all of the supported operating systems. So you see there's a number of them here. I would say for production, the most popular, I would say with most customers is Red Hat. That's quite common for production purposes. Although certainly, we have Windows customers as well that are using Server 2008 or 2012 for production. And then for development, people use any of these, really. Could be Windows, could be the Macintosh, could be a Linux distribution. Whoa. All right, so so basically I went ahead and already downloaded the Windows installer, went through it, just next, wizard, installed on my machine. And then the next step is to start it running. And in Windows, the way you start it running is you go to Services and you select Start. So I'll do that, and it'll take just a few seconds to start it running. If you're installing and then running on a different operating system, as many of you may be, then if we look in the documentation, docs.marklogic.com, this is a really good URL to remember, docs.marklogic.com, because we've got all these guides on all sorts of different aspects to MarkLogic. So we've got developer guides for the different APIs. For administrators, we've got the administrator's guide. We've got guides on the native programming languages, the works. In terms of installing, you would go to the installation guide for all platforms. And in here, under procedures, there's a nice table here for installing MarkLogic Server. So it shows you for whether you're Windows or Red Hat Linux or Sun or the Mac operating system, how to install. And then likewise, there's the corresponding steps for how to start it running on those different platforms as well. All right, so we've got MarkLogic running. And let's now go toward creating our database. We could create our database programmatically through any of those APIs I mentioned, or we can use a GUI tool, which we call the admin interface, and it's at localhost :8001. And if we go there, I'm going to log in with my MarkLogic username and password, which happens to be admin in this case. And it'll take us to this interface that comes up because MarkLogic is running and allows me to do all sorts of administrative tasks, including create a database. So let's go ahead and select that. And anything you can do in here, you can also do programmatically, like through the REST API. So any of you who prefer to work on the command line or from your application code. So we'll go ahead and do create. And let's make a database. How about we'll call it news. You can call your database whatever you want. There's also tons of settings here if I was to scroll down. Lots of settings for your database. The only thing you have to fill out to go ahead and create one is just giving it a name. And you can always come back and change things later. So. All right, so we have a database, and there's one more thing that we're going to also need to create to have a database that we can load data into, and that is a forest. And there's a little message here suggesting that we create and attach a forest to our database. We're going to do that, but let's also talk about that. You know, what is a forest? All right. All right, so when you go to load data into your database, there has to be a place for the data to go, for it to be stored on disk. And so that's going to be a forest. Okay? And a forest is really just a directory, a folder, that you specify on disk. And then you attach that location to your database so that when data gets loaded into the database, it, in the background, behind the scenes, goes down into that directory, which you have defined as your forest. And why do we have forests? Why does it work this way? Imagine that you're doing a cluster, because you have a lot of data and you want to spread it across a cluster of hosts, a cluster of nodes, right? What you can do is you define your database. Your database is then known across all of the hosts in your cluster, your MarkLogic cluster. And then what you can do is you can create one or more forests on those different servers to store your data. And then when you're loading data into your database, behind the scenes, it's getting distributed to those forests in your cluster. Yeah? So that's the deal with the forest. All right, let's make ourselves a forest. So configure forests. And we'll do create. And you can call your forest whatever you want. Really common is to name it after your database and then to give it a number, thinking about that cluster situation, and you might have a lot of forests that you then attach to your database. So we'll call it News 01. There's other settings in here. And yeah, in the administrator's course, so I might also tell you about our courses that we have at MarkLogic University. The best thing for you to do if you're interested in more on all of this is to take the one-day fundamentals course. And then if you want to go further and you're interested in working with forests and administrative tasks, we have an administrative course. Or we also have a semantics course if you're really interested in that. And we also have developer courses as well for xQuery, Java, and Node. So anyway, I was going to say in the admin course we do all sorts of stuff with forests. All right, we have a forest, we have a database, so now we just need to attach the forest to the database. So if we go back to databases and select our news database, then we can click on our shortcut link here, and we can go ahead and attach that forest. So yeah, you have to have at least one forest attached to your database in order to load data into your database. Otherwise, there's nowhere for it to go, and it'll tell you, I can't load it because there's no forest attached. Beautiful. All right, our database is set up and ready to go. So made our forest, we attached our forest to our database. So now we can load data into our database. So let's talk about that. All right, so as you may have heard or gathered, the way that we store data in a MarkLogic database is what we call a document. And a document doesn't have to be a long, traditional document. It can be quite small. It could be something really short and tiny. It could be just a name-value pair. That could be a document you store. The document types that we support are JSON, XML, text, binary, and RDF triples. RDF triples is semantic data. That's what that is. So yeah, we store any of these document types. So RDF triple is specialized for semantics. That's what it's all about. Binary is if you have a document type that doesn't fit into JSON, XML, text, or triple. So if you had PDF files or Word files or Excel files or videos or images, right? Anything really, you can store in the database. Now in terms of searching your content, we love JSON and XML files because they have structure in them. And I'll show a couple examples here. But they have structure, which means we can address and target certain areas of documents if we choose to in doing our queries. With text files, we can search those as well, but we just, they don't have any structure. We can't address the structure. And then binary files, we can't search inside of them because a binary file is it's like a rock, right? You can't search inside of it, but you could attach properties to your binary files in MarkLogic, and then you could query your properties. So that's cool. Yeah, definitely different types can all be in the same database, no problem. And we have a variety of ways to load any of these document types into our database. And I'll mention a few of those in the next couple slides here. All right, here's an example of a JSON document. And this is an example of having a document with structure. And by that I mean that you have a property and a value, If we were to look at the XML equivalent of it, it looks like this. Because maybe you want to search just in the title for a certain word, right? Maybe you want to search on Greece only in the title element or only in the title property rather than just searching the whole document. All right, as we talked about, text documents don't have any structure, but you can still search them. You could search for Greece in there. And then binary files, as we talked about, includes any other type of file. And you can have properties like metadata that you associate with those binaries, and you can search that. Okay. And so some binary formats like PDF or Word, you can actually convert them into XML files as you're loading them into the database using a technology we have in MarkLogic called the Content Processing Framework. So that's kind of cool, because that makes it, then you could search inside of the XML versions of these files, and you could address structure inside of them. Here's an example of a semantic triple. If you haven't seen one before, this is how it's stored in MarkLogic in a database. You have three parts, right, for a triple. You have the subject, the predicate, and the object. And the easiest way to read these IRIs, as they're called, is just read the ends of them, right? Greece is a type of country. And as you may have heard from some of the presentations, semantics is all about providing meaning that a computer can understand about your data. So I have a little example of how, if you're thinking, well, how would I use semantics, right? So here's our news application. We've got some articles. And imagine we select one of them. I'll select the first one here. And when we select that article, we see the article, associated image. And then over here on the right, we see mentioned in this article are these entities, right? This person, this city, this country. Right? And if we wanted to know more about that country or that person, we could select it. Right? And then it goes, and in this case, fetches semantic data about this country and displays the flag and the country and the currency and description about it. So that's an example of semantics in use. All right, well, back to our application here. We need to load our articles into the database. So let's go look at those. I've gathered these articles from the BBC, and I've got them on my file system, and we're going to load them in. Before we load them in a database, let's just go take a quick look at them so we can see what we're working with here. So if we go over to MLS projects, news, and then docs to load, I've got these XML files. So these could be XML, they could be JSON, they could be text files, they could be binary files, they could be triples, right? Any of these types, and they could all go into the same database as well and search across them. So here's just, XML document. Cool. So let's talk about options we have for loading these documents, and then go ahead and pick one. So we could use MarkLogic Content Pump. MarkLogic Content Pump is a command line Java-based tool. It's great for bulk loading millions or even billions of documents. It's quite efficient, it's quite popular. We're going to use that because it is so common and popular. There's other ways you can load documents or write documents into the database as well, though. You could use Query Console is a little tool we'll look at in a few minutes here that is quite handy for being able to see what's in your database, as well as allowing you to write Xquery and JavaScript code to communicate with your database, like to load documents or to run a query or to delete documents or to create another database. There's the RESTful API that we have, which allows us to, from your favorite programming language, be able to talk to the database. Of course, also through the Node and Java APIs, and then also the content processing framework, which I mentioned also allows you to manipulate the documents as you load them in. All right, so to use MarkLogic Content Pump to load our documents, we need the Java runtime of 1.6 or later, which I've already got on my machine. And we need the MLCP files. This is an open source project, which we could download from developer.marklogic.com/product/MLCP. I've already got those files on my machine. All you do is you bring them down and you unzip them. That's it. And then we need a way to talk to our database. We need to have a port for being able to communicate with our news database. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go set up this port, and then we'll be able to use MarkLogic Content Pump to load documents through that port. All right, so to set up a port, it's what we call a REST API instance, which we'll be making for our news database. Mentioned here are, benefits. You can write documents, read documents, do search queries. And let's go about making that happen. So we need to do two things. One is we need to create some sort of a configuration file, as we call it, where we say what's the database that we want to set up a port for, what's the port number we want to use. You can use any port number that you're not already using on your computer. So we'll go with 8011. And then you just need to give it a name. That's just an internal name. So the main thing is what database, what port do I want to use? All right. And then what we need to do is we need to take that configuration file and we need to send it to MarkLogic to say, do this. Go set up this port for this database. And to do that, we talk to MarkLogic through port 8002 to set up a port for a database, specifically through this endpoint called REST APIs. And you can talk to that port through any programming language or tool that can make HTTP requests. So, whatever you like to use. What I'm using here is, is called curl. A lot of you are probably familiar with curl. It's a really popular command line open source tool for being able to do things like make HTTP requests. All right, so, and I know there's a lot of stuff going on in here.
Can you also create the REST service through the admin console?
No. Question was, can you set up this port through the admin interface? It's interesting, you can't. You actually do it through here. I guess the thinking behind that perhaps was that, well, if you're going to be making RESTful calls, you're going to be comfortable on the command line and that sort of thing. But yeah, people ask that sometimes, like, yeah, do it through the GUI interface, but yeah. All right, so, and I know for people who are not familiar with this sort of thing, there's a lot going on, but the important parts I've bolded. So we're talking to MarkLogic through port 8002, and we're posting that configuration file that we were just looking at. That one that said, what's the database name and what's the port number? Okay. All right, so let's go do this. Okay, and then we'll be able to see that it's there once we do it. All right, so here's that command. I know I had it bigger, but I'm going to go ahead and copy it. We're going to run it on the command line. And what it's going to do is it's going to send, we could either send the configuration information in an XML format or as JSON, either way, right? We're going to send that file. All right, so let me open up a command prompt window. And I'm going to go to where I have curl, C:\curl. And then I'm going to go ahead and right-click and paste to run that curl command. I mentioned I'm using curl because it's a simple little utility for doing this, but you would otherwise make this call from your favorite programming language that makes HTTP calls. And if we hit enter, at first, it comes back, it says unauthorized, because in this call here, I said any authentication. MarkLogic responds by saying, I support digest. And then what curl does is it retries as digest as the authentication. And then it comes back and says, OK, it's created. So if we want to see if it really is, if we really now have the ability to talk to our database through port 8011, we can go in our browser and put in localhost :8011. And then if all is well, we'll see this page, which is giving us ideas about things we can do through that port in talking to our database. So it's like a helpful information page. It's telling us that we could add documents. We could put documents into the database, or we could read documents from the database, or we could run a search query against the database. And we'll do all these things as we go along here. But great, so we've got that port set up. So now that we have that port to talk to our database, we can go ahead and use MarkLogic Content Pump to load documents into the database through that port. And as I mentioned, MarkLogic Content Pump is just one of the many ways you have for loading documents. Right? It's quite a popular one, but it's one of many. So what I'm going to do is copy this command. And actually, I'm going to go to that directory where I have MarkLogic Content Pump. So I'm doing cd space C:\MLCP, which is where I downloaded those files to and unzipped them to. And now I'm going to right-click and paste this command. I thought I copied it, but let's try that again. My MLCP command, select all, copy, paste. All right. I need to change directory down into the bin directory under MLCP. All right. All right, run. So yeah, so now what's going to happen, MarkLogic Content Pump is going to read those files in the file system, those XML files, right, all our articles, and it's going to then talk to our news database through that port 8011 we set up, and it's going to basically write the documents into the database. And once it's done, which it is now, it tells us it read 469 documents. None of them failed. They all went in. So now a nice tool for us to be able to see the contents of a database. We could do a get here, of course, if we wanted to. But another nice tool we have is called Query Console. And if we go to localhost :8000 and do admin, then we'll get to this tool. And yeah, so this is called Query Console. It's quite popular to use when you're working with MarkLogic because along with being able to write scripts in here to your database, you can also simply look at what's in your database. So if we choose our news database from the list there, and we click on Explore, we can see our 469 documents in the database. And yeah, if we want to select any of them, we could see the contents of the document. And sure enough. All right, nice. So we now have we now have our database with our documents inside of it. All right, so now that we have documents in our database, we can run queries against it. So let's do that. We can run queries through, we have different choices. We can run queries through Query Console, the application we were just looking at. You can run scripts in there. Through the REST API. I'll show you what that looks like as well. Question or? No, it's just head scratch, okay. Cool. Through the Node or Java APIs, or also in a Xcode JavaScript application that you've created and are perhaps having MarkLogic host for you, which we'll see, because that's going to be ours. All right, so let's now, in this Query Console tool, let's go ahead and run a query like we see here, so that we might want to search through all of our articles and bring back the ones that have earthquake or whatever you might want to search on. Right? So I'm going to import a workspace. Workspace is pretty cool. It's where you have a bunch of tabs you've saved where maybe you've done some queries and you want to perhaps share them with your colleagues because maybe you want to share scripts that you've written with them. And in our case, the reason I'm bringing these tabs is so that, just to save on time, I'm not up here trying to type under pressure. So let's do this first one here. This is called CTS Search. CTS stands for Core Text Search. It's a function we've had forever in MarkLogic. It's quite cool. There's all sorts of things you can pass in as arguments to it to make it highly customizable for the search that you want to run. We're starting off real simple here. We're saying fndoc, which is search all the documents in my database. You could narrow that down if you wanted to through expressions. We're going to say search all the documents. I'm searching for the word earthquake, and I would like to bring back the best 10 documents for that. And let's go ahead and run it. And oh, I need to select my database that I want to run this against. There we go, our news database. And then when we run it, it comes back with those documents in their entirety in this case. That's the default behavior. All right, well maybe instead of bringing back the whole documents, maybe we just like to fetch the titles of those documents. So what we could do, let's go ahead and run this, and it comes back with just the titles. I mentioned it comes back with the best 10 documents because I didn't want to go into all the details of the algorithms that determine what are the best 10 documents. But I do want to mention that you have this really sophisticated default behavior that's already there for you, but you can also customize it. And in the Search Developers Guide, it goes into all the details behind how the documents get scored and ranked on the results, and how you can customize how it behaves for your data and your documents. All right, so that's neat. So here we're saying, yeah, search in all the documents for earthquake. This is a little bit of Xquery here. And return just the title elements, just the titles from them, and display that. So that's great. But what if we wanted to search just in the titles? Right? Maybe we want to search just a certain part of the documents, not throughout the whole document. So if we look at query 3 here, that's what we're doing here. We're saying search in the title elements within those documents for the word earthquake and bring those titles back. So yeah, through JSON and XML documents, because they have that structure, you can do really interesting things to address certain parts of your documents. Cool. All right, here's just an example of the same thing, but using JavaScript. So right with MarkLogic 8, both Xquery and JavaScript are built-in programming languages. JavaScript runs on the V8 engine. Google's V8 engine is built into MarkLogic 8. So you see the same sort of thing here. And here's the same thing we did, but with the JavaScript version to bring back just the titles. And here, this is something called the Search API. This is another way you can do search. Instead of CTS Search, we also have a higher level API for search called Search. And if I run it, we'll see the results for this, which is that for each document, it's instead of bringing back the whole document, it's finding where was the word found, putting it in a search highlight element, and if there's any text before or after it, returning that as well, right? We call that the snippet text. And you can perhaps imagine how you as a developer might then take that response and then put it into your application for your end users so that they could see, maybe you use this style like cascading style sheets to, oh, show that looking green and show the snippet text before and after where that was found as well. All right, a couple more things on search and then we're going to stand up our application and we'll be good. So search we just talked about. JSearch is something that we have in MarkLogic 8. It's relatively new. It's quite cool. It's a fluent call chain pattern for JavaScript developers. So we have that now. That's another way you can do search. And then I just wanted to also show you an example of using the RESTful API for doing search. And in that case, you would put in the port to talk to your database. And then you would put /v1, it stands for version 1, the search endpoint, $Q for query, equals, and whatever it is you want to search on. And then you would see the results coming back very similar to what we just saw, where you would have your highlight, search highlight. Where is it? Here it is. Search highlight, the word that was searched on, and any snippet text before and after where that word was found that you could then use in your application code. All right, last part, the best part. Now that we've got this all set up, we can go ahead and stand up our application. So let's do that. We talked about the different programming interfaces. You can either do Xcode or JavaScript and have MarkLogic host your application if you'd like to, or you can talk to MarkLogic from outside from your programming language. And so we talked about all this. So let's go ahead and create what we call MarkLogic. We call it an HTTP app server that's going to host our Xcode application code that's going to talk to our database. All right. So let's go to port 8001 in here. This is something you could also do programmatically. But I'm going to go to Configure Groups, Default, and then App Servers. And we're going to create what we call an HTTP app server. This is having MarkLogic host your application code. And we need to specify a port for this application. Let's do 8012 just to pick a port. We're going to want to be able to talk to our news database from our application code, which we're going to specify in the root field. And our application code that we're going to set up is going to be, it could be anywhere you want. We're going to put it down under our projects folder and news. We're going to make a folder in here called app. So we'll make ourselves a little app folder. And that could be called anything. And we're going to put a little tryout file first in here, just to try this out and make sure we've got it set up right. And then we'll put the rest of our application code. So we're going to say, yeah, in this folder is where our application files are going to be. There it is. So we're going to put that into root. So we're saying that's where application files are. And then we could name this anything. It's pretty common to put the port number in your database name, but that's your choice. All right, let's click on OK. And it'll take just a few seconds to go ahead and build that little app server. And then there we go, it's ready to go. So now we could go and look at this. We can go to localhost colon 8012/tryout, because that's our little file we want to test with. Log in. And yeah, we see the results of our code. Let's go look at that tryout file real quick so you can see what's inside of there. So in our tryout file, we've got a little X query saying, yeah, look in the title elements for earthquake and bring back the titles and display them. So that's what we've got. All right, let's put in the last bit of code I wrote to actually, make our little application. So you can see the final thing. So in our news folder, an app code, I'm going to copy this. Most of this is just CSS files. There is, though, the index file, which has got my code in it to do the searching. So let me copy those over to app. And it's fine. And let's check it out. So if we go to view our index.xqi file, we've got our app. And if we search on, we're probably tired of earthquakes. How about a hero? You see the results come back. We could select an article. Got our article. If you want to search on earthquakes, since we have been working with that. Got that. All right, and to just show you real fast, that code here in the index file, it's similar to what we had already. It's just, there's just more. Yeah, so just some functions. If any of you are interested in writing xQuery, we have the xQuery developer course. It's 4 days. Take the fundamentals one first, then the xQuery course. All right, we are on our home stretch here. I think we're pretty much done. Let me go back over to our slides. Made our app server, stood up our application. Here, so yeah, if you took it further, so what we did, but then you wanted to add your semantics data as well, right? You could end up building out an application like this. So, click. So if you want to access the code, the little simple one here that I did in our session is at that URL, and the more advanced project is at this URL here. All right. So yeah, so that was everything in our session, and just here, what to do next. Yeah, if you're interested in all this, you want to get hands-on, doing it yourself. It's different projects. We actually cover a lot more in the one-day course. But if you're at all interested, I encourage you to take that. It's free, right? You can take the fundamentals course. If you go to MarkLogic.com, you can see all of our courses. They're all free. I think we used to charge something like $800 a day per person for training. So it's quite it's quite amazing that you can actually take all our classes now for free. It's really cool. And in the fundamentals course, you can actually do it as a regular class online with an instructor like myself or one of my 7 colleagues, or there's a self-paced version of it as well. And I did that one, so you'll hear my voice a lot if you take that one. All right, documentation, if you want to just jump right in, you don't need training, right? We've got really nice guides. We've also got these nice feature-focused training videos on different aspects. Like if you're just interested in MarkLogic Content Pump or just interested in something else, we've got these like 20, 30-minute videos on different topics. And that also, there's a mobile app for that as well. So that's pretty cool. And then also, this is quite nice as well for asking questions. We have a really nice support department that's really good. Most of the support people actually sit with our engineering team in San Carlos, so really, really good quality. But if perhaps you don't have a support contract yet because you're maybe just still checking out MarkLogic, you can ask questions on the mailing list. It's quite good. And that's it. We can do questions. You guys can applaud.
In
Question?
the beginning, you create a database,
Yeah.
What's the semantics of having multiple forests in one database? Is it just for spreading out the data?
Yeah.
For partitioning?
And I'll repeat the question. Yeah, it is. You got it. So the question was, why would I have more than one forest for my database? And as you answered, yes, because you have a lot of data and you want to spread it across multiple, servers, perhaps storage media. In general, a good rule of thumb is this is not a hard and fast rule, but 200 gigabytes per forest maximum is a good rule of thumb for like the best performance possible. So you might even have on one of your hosts, you might have a terabyte or 2 terabytes of space, and you might set up multiple forests even on just one host.
So when you import data, you always import into the database, not into a particular forest.
Right, yeah. So when you import data, you import it into the database, and then behind the scenes, it gets distributed into the forest. And if you're interested in controlling that or working with that and getting into we have tiered storage where you can control that your older data goes on your slower storage media, then do the admin course, the administration course, because we do things like that in there. Yeah, awesome. What else? Yeah.
How do you maintain the relationship when you're transforming your PDFs and your other binaries, for example? When you're putting it into the database, how do you maintain the relationship between the XML or whatever format it is that you've transformed it to and the original document?
Okay, great. Yeah, so question was, what if you're using the content processing framework and you want to you want to load that PDF, you want to generate an XML version of it, but you want to keep both of them because maybe you want to run searches against the XML document, but maybe you want to be able to also return the PDF file to somebody who asked for it. Yeah, by default, when you use the content processing framework, it gives names to your XML file and accompanying files from that transformation that are the same name as your PDF file. So you can tell by the names in the database of the documents which ones go together. But you can also customize the content processing framework to behave however you want. You can create custom pipelines and it's highly customizable.
So can you do a transformation and pull the PDF in as well?
Yes, by default the PDF comes in as well. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. What else?
The PDFs are also stored in the forest?
Yeah, because they're binaries. So the PDFs are also stored in the forest by default. Yeah, that's binaries.
So if you create at some point a file system backup, you'll have all your documents within the forest that are being backed up as well.
You would have, by default, you'll have the PDFs and the XML files that were generated as well. You could then, if you didn't want the PDFs, something you could delete them, but by default, the behavior is to have both. Yeah, cool. Question?
Is there some way to do hierarchical information? For example, let's say group sort of documents in a particular folder or collection or?
Yeah, so question about how can I organize my documents in the database so that as a developer I could retrieve a group of the documents, right? Because if you're just throwing everything into one giant database, how could you address a subset of documents in the database? And you can do that through a couple of techniques. One of them is called collections. So you can assign documents to collections. It's like you're tagging them, you're labeling them. So a document could even be tagged with more than one collection. So that's quite handy. And then another way you can do it is with what we call directories. And it's to do with your URIs, the name of your document, and how you choose to name it. Like if we were to look back here at Query Console, and if we were to look at our documents that we loaded, the way that when I went to load them, one of my options in MarkLogic Content Pump was specifying a pattern for the URIs. And so I put in /content, /news, and then the original file name as my URI, my name of my document. And you could then run a query to say, like XDMP directory is a function where you can say only the documents that are in the content directory, or only down under content and news, only those documents I want to search or delete or modify. Yeah. So yeah, so collections and directories are how we address documents within that giant pool of a database. Yeah, good. Other questions?
Could you show the links again for the GitHub?
Oh, the GitHub links. Yeah, sure. Yeah, cool. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to stay up here, and I'll be in the room for a while. So if you guys want to ask me questions, yeah, please do. I've got business cards, too, if you want my card. And thank you for coming. And maybe I'll see you in fundamentals course. Yeah. You're going to do it all hands-on. You know? Awesome. Thanks.